So let's talk about Retrieval and Allocators and Filecoin Plus. I have been working with FIDL, the Filecoin Incentive Design Lab, that is spinning out to do a bunch of compliance tooling and help engage with incentives in Filecoin. And so a lot of what the last month has been for me is trying to read up and understand both where things are today and how they've come to be that way. And so this is me challenging myself to actually say that in a somewhat coherent way. And so I'm happy to be called out on places that I have not understood fully. But I think it's sort of an interesting thing to see of, how these goals have changed. So shortly after the launch of the Filecoin mainnet in late 2020, we got FIP 003 that established the Filecoin Plus program. And it starts with a motivation that Filecoin Plus exists to build a decentralized network of useful storage. And so frames this incentive layer as trying to provide the flexibility to change the economics to incentivize behavior that would not be incentivized by the base protocol itself. And this is one of the diagrams that got sort of thrown out in the initial discussions of FIL Plus and still gets referred to today. And it sort of says, well, what is it that is good and bad, and how do we think about this? It says, well, really what you want is some available storage that you can grow into, but mostly you want real deals and you want real data. That's like a healthy network. And on the flip side, you don't want to necessarily have an oversupply of committed capacity that's not being used. And you need to do the separation between what gets referred to here as real deals versus malicious deals, where a real deal is like, well, there's data in there that has some use. There's useful storage versus a malicious deal is random bytes or something that's not really providing any value. And so there's this segmentation that's hoped for that's, I think, probably the subjective layer that we're still wrestling with in the FIL Plus world. And so, okay, so what happened after the introduction of FIL Plus? Well, one of the things that happened is we're actually doing really well on identifying this ratio of committed capacity to not committed capacity, right? That we saw sort of a pretty immediate thing of like, great, we have this incentivization tool, committed capacity now, much less economically profitable. That part, easy to differentiate, different class of thing. And so you've got sort of a different reward that you're getting for just having the capacity to put storage versus having something in there, having a deal made using that storage. And so we're seeing less of this, there's huge growth that continues exponentially of committed capacity without it actually being used, that's no longer like a attractive proposition. So that first like chunk definition was a very easy one, whereas this subjective definition of what's real versus malicious continues to be something that we're wrestling with. So today we've got a much more visibility into what's going on. Most deals that are getting made on Filecoin are being made using Filecoin Plus multipliers. Most of that is happening through the LDN sub-allocation program that has existed in various forms and through an evolution. But there's starting to be some other tracks as well, including an enterprise FIL Plus and a set of sort of direct allocation notary programs that have been experimented with. And so in LDN, the program as it exists today, there's a set of elected notaries who will review client applications, and 2 of them will need to sign off to provide data cap to that client. We can see that what we have today is, 30% of that is new clients coming in, while 85% is existing clients getting subsequent rounds of that. So this is a reflection of 2 things. One is that in general, we're not giving people all of the data cap that they need for their thing up front. We're giving them maybe 10 to 15% of what they want up front, seeing what they're doing, confirming that it's good, and then most of it goes through this subsequent allocation process where there's now some evidence that, you've uploaded the data you said you would in the way you would. Let's keep flowing through, continuing, but that there's this process that involves review throughout the upload process. And that's how this still 95% of our data cap is getting allocated and being sort of validated through that structure. So what's getting worked on? There's a few complaints about FIL Plus that we hear in the community in various ways. So getting data cap takes too long. There's this process that I have to go through. If I've got an FVM smart contract, how do I automatically interact with getting attractive storage deals in that pipeline? Because a smart contract can't apply for data cap through notaries and sign KYC and so forth because it's a smart contract. There's this question of like, oh, but I don't know necessarily which allocator. What happens if some allocator just gets mad at me, or some notary gets mad at me? How do I understand this process in a very objective way that I think sort of interacts with those ones? There's this critique that right now we're very heavily weighted on this like LDN process around I want to see the data, and so as you get into I've got my company that's putting its encrypted backups. I don't want other people to see them because they're proprietary information. How do I interact with that? Is there too much focus on one definition of good? And then, likewise, I have private data. I don't want to tell you about who my clients are or how much they're paying me. Those are, proprietary pieces of information that are my competitive advantage. And how do I navigate while maintaining, my private stuff? Yep.
Do you want to take questions now?
Nope. So here's sort of, I think, my understanding of the answers and the paths that are happening that we'll discuss probably after Miro talks in more depth. We're moving to a world of separate allocators. So instead of there being one monolithic large dataset notary program, we'll have a bunch of individual allocators that look like an evolution of those notaries, but they're now responsible for maintaining an individual set of clients and working directly with them. And they have sort of a higher level of autonomy and power in maintaining their interaction with their set of clients. And so that should mean that we get better competition where, an allocator who wants to be a successful allocator is, one of the ways they can differentiate is by having good SLAs or actually like having some of that, like having a good client experience. And so that hopefully gets you competition on that allocator front up to that. We are starting to design, and I'm excited to talk later today about some of the possibilities for automatic allocators, smart contract-based allocators, and sort of other ways that we can have data cap flowing. And then I think the other thing that we're excited to be thinking about is splitting up what has been this LDN world, where what LDN is doing versus this allocator V5 path that we're embarking on and transitioning to right now is LDN was one evaluation of success, right? So there's an evaluation layer that's common, which is this real data? Someone is going to manually check and confirm, can we get that data? And so there's a set of things, and we say, great, if we've got these evaluation criteria, the data is retrievable, the data is being stored on multiple SPs, the data is actually the data set that the client claims to be. Those are all three fairly objectively verifiable things. The client has told us what that data set is up front, and then we can confirm that it actually is. So great. Now we've got a common evaluation standard. We can let there be separate allocators that just individually allocate. We can judge them on this common evaluation framework, and now we can just do a competition of who's actually onboarding data that matches that evaluation framework the best. And we can trim people who are not complying with the evaluation framework, and new people can come in if they think they can do better, and we should be at a competition up to good compliance with this evaluation framework, as opposed to a centralized thing where there's less motivation for a notary to necessarily be competing in that same way. So I think that's sort of the thought of more autonomy here, and I think that we're living in a world where we're aspiring to some sort of flea market capitalism. I don't know, on chain, as one does, I guess. Okay, retrievals. I think the next thing we get is Miro will talk about Spark and how Retrieval which has been the current way that the LDN evaluation is confirming that data is available for access, will hopefully fade into a decentralized world where it is much harder to differentiate those retrieval attempts from real user use. And so the compliance such that Spark is able to report the data is available means that real users also can get that data, which is exciting. And then I think we're also interested in other evaluation signals that could be used to identify retrievable data, right? So we've got currently Retrieval that we have known sort of limitations on, like it's downloading whole pieces, but it can do things like it can download encrypted whole pieces without having to decrypt them, which maybe is what a backup-like use case would be for enterprise data. There's this set of data that's meant to be open data that will get individual sort of piecemeal, like an individual image might get asked for from the gateway. And that's something that Spark can do well at being able to replicate. But you may have other signals like, oh, the SID is like ending up on popular websites. And you could try and say, well, look, what we see is like data that are the SIDs in this open data set are actually showing up in a lot of very popular websites. And that maybe is a reflection of this is popular data that is actually getting usage and is bringing value to the Filecoin network. And so any other objective like evidence that data sets are actually proving useful is something that I think is interesting to think about. That there's the direct, like, I can get this, that's a good sign of like, this is open data, but there are other ones as well. And we should be thinking about what else we can evaluate to understand utility of data. Like, is this data that then leads to like good PR things? Is that something we can measure? But like anything that we can go out and measure can become a basis for sort of indicating that this is useful data that we want to be storing and encouraging. And then on allocators, so these allocators are the differentiating and allowing some additional competition and how we get data in that we give data cap to. Updating the tooling is an effort that the FIL team is embarking on right now. How do we take a set of tooling that was that still exists for this single LDN repo and the single program that notaries interact with, and instead make it a reusable thing that can get deployed for each allocator. So an allocator can easily run an instance of this tooling or the subset of it that they find useful. So if you're an allocator, you have your clients and you want to run SID checker against those to make sure that they're not just duplicating and that they've got a good replication of their data, that's something that we want to make pretty easy for you to redeploy your own instance that you modify, or use one and say, actually also check my repo of my clients. And as long as your client applications follow some basic pattern, you can use the one that will just run as a service, or if you change it, then you can change and run your own SID checker pretty easily. So we want to make the tooling a thing that the allocators have flexibility on differentiating the parts that they think they can compete on, using a common baseline at least, so that they've got some good compliance options available and aren't running blind. And then at the same time, as FIL, we want some visibility where we can just run it against all of these allocators based on what's public on chain. And we can say, hey, this allocator sure doesn't look like they're doing any compliance. And we can flag that up to the program level stuff. So making sure that there's good baseline levels of transparency and visibility into what's going on. Here is what the FIL Plus allocation tree looks like today, courtesy of not quite GraphViz, but there may be a GraphViz variant of this coming soon. We're still working through that. So here are the 75 different LDN-ish allocators that are splitting up into being their own allocators. And these are all under sort of this LDN, and this is actually a mix where you actually probably imagine another layer of tree here that splits between open data sets and enterprise data sets. Right now, they're all lumped together under just LDN, which is the evaluation layer. And so we're thinking that these ones that applied all are sort of saying that they want a manual evaluation, that they're looking at clients with some sort of human in the loop, and that they're going to have an evaluation type of thing that looks sort of like an evolution of the existing tooling of things like SID checker, making sure that it's not just duplicate data, making sure that there's an expected split across multiple SPs, and so it's not all going to a single provider. So these same baseline criteria that have been in place. there's a set that's starting to emerge that is automatically evaluating itself. And so it's trying to get to non-human in the loop through various means. And then we've also got, a thought that we're starting to design what might be economic market-based models or more innovation-based models. And I think these are still in design. But there's places high up in the tree to start expanding and looking for individual instances that might fall under those sorts of things. And so the thought here is right now, in the world that's existing in the next week or two, we expect the root key holders to actually make direct allocations to a bunch of these. But what we hope to do pretty soon, as I understand it, is have something like an LDN smart contract where the root key holders can give a significant data cap allocation to that smart contract, and that smart contract can then do the allowances to all of these individual allocators to then make their allocations to their clients. And so we can have not only the root key holders having to deal with the overhead of auditing on these various different frameworks, but they can say, okay, LDN has one evaluation framework. Overall, is LDN meeting, our compliance target of meeting at SIGCHECK or overall? And then that LDN contract can have a committee that says, great, what we're going to do is run evaluation over all of the sub-allocators, and we'll keep giving data cap out as long as they meet their, the baseline that we're after. And so we can have a tree-like structure of this common evaluation levels, and then independent people getting data cap to allocate independently as long as they meet the evaluation criteria they're signed up for. So that's the sort of path, as I understand it, that FIL Plus is on.